Welcome to Faith and Science. I'm Dr. John Ashton. On the news the other day, I heard that in a couple of states in the United States, atheists had gone to the courts and had been successful in getting a court ruling to stop Bibles being given out in public schools by the Gideon Society, by the Gideons. So many folk would know that the Gideons are a group that give out Bibles for people to read. They often leave them in hotel and motel rooms. Often you would go there and you would find a Bible to read that had been donated by this society. And I thought that this was really interesting, particularly in America, because the Bible plays such an important part in their history. The first pilgrims, of course, who came across there to settle in America there were fleeing religious persecution. These are people that wanted to have the Bible and be able to read the Bible. And the Bible is, as we know, is a special book. It contains the history not only of the Hebrews and the Jews, but it's more than that. It's really one of the oldest recorded histories of the world, and the accounts thereof of God, our Creator, the Creator of the universe and the earth and life on it, interactions with men. And of course, people are disputing this, that the Bible is an inspired book. But there's so much evidence, of course, that it is. We just have to look at, say, the prophecies in the book of Daniel. Daniel, who was mentioned before as an advisor to King Nebuchadnezzar that built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and the dream that God gave Nebuchadnezzar at that time, nearly 600 years before the birth of Christ, about what the future of that, the empires of that part of the world would be. And of course that book was written down at that time, written by Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar was given a dream. Daniel was able to reveal what the dream was to the king, because Daniel prayed to God for that God would reveal to him to Daniel what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was, and God did. Daniel saw in vision what the dream was, and God also revealed to Daniel what the dream meant. And it was really a revelation of what would happen to Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom and what would happen to the following kingdoms. And the dream extends right up to the time when God returns, when Jesus Christ returns. And of course it predicted that the Babylonian Empire would be followed by the Persian Empire, which would be followed by the Greek Empire, which would be followed by the Roman Empire, which would be there's subsequently divided up into many countries, many smaller little empires that would never unite until, and in the days of those kingdoms, God would return and, of course, set up his kingdom. And we know that's exactly what happened in history. Cyrus's general Gobius took Babylon in about 538 BC, and then the Persian Empire was conquered by Alexander the Great, I think around 331 BC, and then, of course, gradually over a period of time, the Greek Empire succumbed to Rome, around 100 or so BC. And, of course, then the Roman Empire deteriorated, 300 AD onwards or thereabouts, up until the fall of Constantinople in I forget the date, Constantinople, about 1100s. And that was the end of the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. And of course Europe today continues to be made up of the many nations that came out of that Roman Empire. And so we know in this particular time, and there are many other prophecies that point to the last days that Jesus pointed to, when God would put an end to the wickedness and evil on our planet, and again our planet would be recreated without the blight of evil and sin and disease and suffering, and God would set up the new earth here for those who trust in God to be recreated, to live with Him forever. And of course, God who created this universe is awesome. I mean, it's just so hard to comprehend, but we see so much evidence of His love in the dealings of people and the miracles of people and answers to prayer. And as I mentioned, I'm just writing up answers to prayer in my own life. So many answers to prayer and providential leading in my own life. And I think I mentioned just recently too, I just finished reading the book Faith Like Potatoes by Angus Buchan, and so many miracles and answers to prayer in his life. And he's a contemporary of me. At the time he started his ministry, I think it was in 1989, somewhere thereabout, and he went on to make a significant difference in South Africa with regard to preserving peace and so forth at the time when they were having huge upheavals over there, social upheavals at that time. And the miracles that he records in his book, Faith Like Potatoes, and essentially what the whole concept of that was, that faith in God is as real as potatoes. Just as you can pick up and hold a potato in your hand, God is that real. And having faith that is real like that leads to the miracles and changes. And of course, I've seen so many good things that have done by people that have believed in God and have stepped out in faith to live lives like Jesus, and the differences that they have made in the world are well documented. But it seems that much of this now it seems to me there's a very deliberate effort not only to stop people having access to the Bible or discourage people from having access to the Bible, but also from discouraging the remembrance of the great people that have made a difference and who great Christians, and the works and efforts that they did that have made the changes that have led to the civilization that we have today. And the other eye-opener that I had just recently reading was that, still in recent times, in the last couple of decades, there are still many places in the world where people practice witchcraft and worship demons and so forth. And even human sacrifices were practiced in some places, according to some reports that I've read, up until it may still be happening, but as part of witchcraft and this satanic worship. And of course the Bible tells us these accounts as well, not only the history of the world, but it warns us that Satan, an evil spirit, an evil angel, and his angels were cast to earth, and they're wreaking havoc here in many ways, influencing, I believe, people's minds. And we've seen the scientific studies in the past that as people remove their morality from the morality of the Bible, and particularly practice sexual promiscuity and so forth, their ability to make good decisions deteriorates. And generally those societies, there's overwhelming evidence that those societies collapse and are taken over by societies that are more moral. And so, again, why people would want to stop people from reading the Bible, which tells people about a God who loves them and who wants to put an end to evil, I just find it very difficult to understand. And as I think about the promotion of many sites that were atheists, I was reading an article too how atheism is growing, particularly among professional scientists and those working in scientific and academic fields. There seems to be an increase in the number of people that are rejecting God in those educated fields. And I find this, again, so hard to understand why these people are rejecting God. And an illustration that I thought of this just recently was that I have gates at our property that are operated by a solar-powered little electric motor, and that saves having to hop out of the car and open the gates and so forth, because we have animals. Only one animal at the moment, apart from wild animals. And the gate stopped working, so I had to have it repaired. So I took the gate motor off and took it around to a friend of mine who's an electronics engineer, a very senior electronics engineer who's responsible for designing new electronic control equipment in industry. And had a look at it, and there's a circuit board that controls the operation of this engine, or of the little motors that open and close the gate. And he said, one of the things I'm going to need is a circuit diagram for this. And of course they contacted the company and they said, this is our intellectual property. We don't let the circuit diagram out. So my friend had a go at fixing. He said, there seemed to be a couple of failed components, but even when I've replaced these failed components, it's still not working. And as I thought about this, as I looked at the circuit board, there must have been several hundred components on this little circuit board that would have been maybe 150 millimetres by 100 millimetres, something like that in size. And as I said, several hundred components. I could recognise things like resistors and little potentiometers and capacitors, and there were relays. There were a series of different relays on the top, about half a dozen little relays, little magnetic relays there. But overall, several hundred components. And I thought, if someone with a huge amount of electronics experience can't sort of necessarily fix this unless has a circuit diagram. In other words, a diagram, a plan of how it works. And I thought, how could something like this evolve? Like, say I was given a pile of components, the 200 components that makes a pile of different sorts of resistors, capacitors, little microprocessor units. There were half a dozen of those. I think there were, different diodes, all these things, and put them together so that it worked. And yet all it has to do is open a gate. It has to operate an electric motor to open a gate. And I thought, well, why is there so much there? But when you think about it, it has to be a system there so that it can open the gate and you can adjust the speed at which the gate opens. And also you have to, there are two gates, and one gate has to close just ahead of the other gate so that they don't jam before they've closed. Also, you want it so that you can adjust the speed so that you can open it or, close it. You don't want it sort of racing open or racing close, because you might not be all the way through and the gate closes, as you press the little remote button. And, of course, then there has to be the little circuit that receives the little signal from the little remote button. to make it open and close, but also it has an emergency function that if the motor has too much torque, in other words, it jams against something, it automatically stops or reopens. And I thought, wow, all this circuitry just to design and make this little gate system work and work in harmonies. And yet when you think about it, I can come along with my brain and with my thoughts, can operate my brain that can then affect my body to move my arm to open and close the gate at just the right speed. It's automatically there in the brain. And as we could see, I thought if I had all those components sat down, in a pile, and I actually, if you do the mathematical probability of arranging those components in a system that works randomly, you could work for billions of years and still not get it, still not arrange those components so that they work. It's just so many of them. Even though there's only a couple of hundred, there's so many possibilities to get the right possibility so that it would work. It just wouldn't happen. And yet atheists believe that our brain evolved such a way that our thoughts can control our brain to do the operations of a complex circuit board like this. And that's a very simple operation, just closing a gate. But there's more, because what had to happen was I had to read the instructions on the gate, or on the installation thing when we had to order a new circuit board. And I had to read the instructions of what to do there. And just the ability to read. And it was interesting, I've been reading an article on research where scientists have been trying to understand how reading could evolve. One of the areas that scientists are trying to answer in terms of some evolutionary model is, why can people read? Because reading involves the capability of what is known as orthographic processing. That is, being able to visually form and store and recall words, such as writing them in the air in front of you. The problem with evolutionist faith is that there hasn't been enough time, it would seem, for the human brain believed to have evolved that the parts of the brain that are needed for reading and fluency. And that is the part of the brain that is called the visual word form area, the VWFA. So scientists don't think that because humans have supposedly evolved from primates, from some type of ape-like creature, there wouldn't have been enough time for this particular structure in the brain to have evolved. And of course we need to always remember that these structures in the brain are programmed by a genetic code in the DNA that, and according to evolutionists, of course, there's got to be some random mutations that produce this, that work. Well, one of the experiments that they've been doing, of course, is actually studying the reading ability of particularly primates, and they've been studying baboons, and different theories have come up. So researchers were studying baboons, and they found that when the baboons were presented with 4-letter strings, they could be trained to discriminate real English words from nonsense combinations that resembled real words. So to give you a bit of an idea, if you had the letters D-O-N-E, which means done, the baboons could distinguish between that and the letters D-N-O-E, which wasn't a word. So when different letters were arranged into some words and non-words, the baboons could correctly identify the novel letter strings as words or non-words at a rate that was measured scientifically as being significantly above chance. So it indicated that the baboons were not really rote learning the visual patterns. And so the fact that baboons could do this with a few little words was really, really exciting for the evolutionists. And some of the research in this area is being done by Professor Michael Colombo at the University of Otago in New Zealand. And one of the things that they did was, with his colleague Dr. Amian Scarf and other co-workers at Ruhr University in Bochum in Germany, they were quite intrigued by this processing ability of the baboons, and they wondered if it was unique. So they began looking at the aspects of the brain and decided to look at the similar processing in pigeons. And the reason why they studied pigeon was their brain architecture and bird brains are quite different. Their brain architecture and visual system are very different to that from both humans and baboons. And so they adapted the baboon experiment to a food reward system, and the researchers set up a little touchscreen so that if the pigeons picked the correct answer, they received grains of wheat. What they found was that the pigeon's ability to discriminate between words and non-words was on a par with that of the baboons. And so they were just as good as picking words and non-words as baboons. Matter of fact, a quote from the paper says, astonishingly, we find that pigeons display every hallmark of orthographic processing displayed by Granger and Al's baboons in their experiment. So the other thing was too, in one measure, the pigeons' achievements were actually more comparable to that of literate humans than of baboons. In other words, they, in some things, they scored even higher than the baboons. Now, this was quite a challenge, really, because the pigeons were able to, and birds were, of course, believed to evolve much earlier in the evolutionary model, and yet here they are, as smart. One of the things that one fascinating experiment was that they found that pigeons could identify the work of different artists. So, for example, they could tell a Picasso from a Monet. And I must admit I couldn't even do that. But I guess if I was trained, after a while I would be able to, hopefully. But so here we see that these abilities there were there in the pigeons as well. And of course this became a major problem for any evolutionary model. But it fits the creational model really well. And one of the important things is, of course, while these pigeons and animals can, like baboons, can identify, maybe 100 different word combinations from non-different word combinations, the human vocabulary is huge and much different. Plus we can synthesise. We use words to communicate. We can learn language and we can write language. But it's interesting that even in our day, there are many humans still today that are illiterate. They can't read or write. And this is pretty serious. But it's one of the things that generally is a result of not having access to proper education. And as I watch my grandchildren learning to read, because I've forgotten, I suppose, with my own children, and this ability as they're just learning to read now, I have some grandchildren just learning to read, and they can get quite excited about reading and identifying words. But this human ability and the human brain is so different. And the Bible talks about how our brain was made we are made in the image of God, and we can see, in a sense, it is talking about our intelligence, our ability to discern logic, our ability to understand mathematics, our ability to construct and design things. The human mind can design. We've been able to design that circuit board that could operate my gates so that they could open at just the right speed. If they jammed on someone, happened to be caught in the gate would stop. It had an emergency set up. The gate could be synchronised so that it opened and stopped perfectly in line with the fence line, so it looked neat. One gate would then just follow a couple of seconds behind and line up exactly with the first gate. When they opened, they were open, and they opened fully. Or, of course, you could adjust them to open at any particular angle that you wanted as well. But that all took design, and the human brain can design things like this, quite complex things. And we have this overwhelming evidence that we're made in this image of God, and also the ability to love, to show kindness for the people that have, and this is what really impresses me, is people like Angus Buchan that came from being a very rough, angry person, quite violent, to accepting Jesus and being changed to be a person that was bringing an end to violence, that was doing good, that was healing, praying for people and seeing people healed. And this is the change that can take place. This is the reality. This is the faith that makes the Christian faith so real. And this is the God that has a plan and a future for us. A plan that people should turn from the wrongdoing that they do and believe in a God that can change them into being the beautiful people that God wanted them to be, and to see the change in their lives. And of course, that's what the Bible tells us about. The Bible tells us about God who allowed himself to die at the hands of wicked people, and for wrong reasons. He was totally innocent, to demonstrate how bad wickedness is, but how much God is prepared to change us, to forgive us, and change us so that we can be the beautiful people, loving and caring for people. And that's the beautiful message of the Bible. And I would encourage everyone listening to this program to read a Bible. Many of us may have Bibles at home and they're not read. Take advantage of it and read it while we still can, while we still have the freedom to read our Bibles. It's a love letter from God. Remember, if you want to listen to these programs, again, just Google 3ABN Australia, or one word, .org.au, and click on the listen button there. You've been listening to Faith and Science. I'm Dr. John Ashton. Have a great day.
You've been listening to a production of 3ABN Australia Radio.